The Art of Portrait Drawing, a Step-by-Step Guide to Mastering Classical Techniques. Introduction. For many artists, producing a realistic human portrait is both their highest aspiration and their greatest challenge. As viewers, we've been examining faces our entire lives, and we intuitively know when faces, in all of their complexity and variation, look real. Yet, despite this intuitive understanding, it takes time and effort for an artist to develop the technical understanding and skill necessary to render a realistic face. This gap between what we recognize and what we can reproduce can be tremendously frustrating until we close it. In this book, I provide you with the fundamentals necessary to begin dosing this gap. You'll learn about measurement and proportions, and how to take an artwork from the initial block-in stage through to the shading of values and details. We'll focus on the individual features that make up the face, and then practice putting them together through cast drawings and by copying masterworks. Finally, I'll show you how to go about applying these techniques to live models. In becoming a skilled portrait artist, there is no substitute for practice, but my hope is that the knowledge in this book will enable you to put your practice to maximum effect. There are no shortcuts, but you can get there with time and passion, and you should take time to appreciate your improvement each step of the way. Contents Chapter 1, Drawing Materials, Page 4 Chapter 2, Measurement Techniques, Page 8 Chapter 3, Understanding the Value Scale, Page 12 Chapter 4, Blocking In, Page 17 Chapter 5, Head Construction, Page 31 Chapter 6, Studying the Features, Page 41 Chapter 7, Cast Study, Page 52 Chapter 8, Copying Masterworks, Page 56 Chapter 9, Demonstrations, Page 59 Chapter 10, Gallery of Drawings, Page 80 Chapter 11, Picture References. Pencils and Tools. General's Charcoal Pencils, HB, 2B, 4B, 6B. Pastel Sticks from Contier Paris, Sanguine and Sepia. Knead Eraser. Carbothello Pastel Pencils, 635, 625, 610. Conti Pencils, Sepia and Sanguine. Snap-off Utility Knife. Soft Knife and Cover. Sennelier Lacarte, Color, Dark Gray B, Strathmore 400 Series, Color, Steel Gray C, Arches BFK Rives Paper, Color, Tan D, Strathmore Drawing Paper. Prepare your pencil. It's important to sharpen your pencil in advance. You can use your utility knife or any other sharpening tools. Be careful, don't hurt yourself. Chapter 2. Measurement Techniques. Comparative Measurement. There are a variety of measurement techniques for drawing, but the two most popular techniques are known as the comparative method and the sight size method. Personally, I must rely on the comparative method. It's what I learned when I first trained at the Academy of Art in Saigon, and I find that it offers greater flexibility than the sight size method. The distinguishing feature of the comparative method is that it involves making accurate measurements of proportion while relying primarily on the naked eye. You may use a pencil, a brush, plumb line, or some other object as a reference to aid your measurements, but you never take exact 1:1 measurements directly from the subject to the paper. Instead of measuring the surfaces of your subject according to an absolute standard, you simply assess their sizes relative to each other. What makes this approach so flexible is that it allows you to vary the size of the image you're creating while maintaining the proper proportions of the subject. Unlike the sight size method, the comparative method doesn't require that your drawing appear from your vantage point to be the same size as the subject. You can scale your measurements up or down to suit your artistic vision. Tips for comparative measurement. When using the comparative method, the most important thing is consistency. Because even subtle shifts in your perspective can alter proportions, you need to make sure that you're always measuring from the same location with the same technique. The use of a straight object such as a pencil, brush, or knitting needle is an important aid to ensure this consistency. I generally use a pencil, as it's usually in my hand already. Here are some tips to keep in mind. When taking a measurement, always hold your hand out with your arm fully extended and your elbow locked. This will help to keep the distance between your eye and your pencil or other straight edge consistent. Similarly, you should dose one eye and keep the other eye a consistent distance from the shoulder from which your arm is extended. I find it best to bend my head a bit to bring my eye closer to my shoulder. Hold your pencil or other straight edge so that your thumbnail rests on the shaft, and you can slide it up or down to mark one end of your measurement. You need to identify one portion of your subject to use as a reference measurement against which other portions will be compared. For example, you might compare the height of the head against the height of the full figure. Make sure that you pick a reference measurement for which the end points, such as the top of the head and the bottom of the chin, are easily remembered and located. To take a reference measurement, look at the area you want to measure and then, while keeping your elbow locked, move your arm and rotate your hand into position so that the pencil aligns like a ruler against the distance you want to measure. Orient the tip of the pencil at one end of the distance, and then slide your thumbnail up or down to mark the other end. Then, make sure to maintain the position of your thumb as you make subsequent measurements. Let's apply these tips to a step-by-step process in the photos below. Measurement with your pencil and thumb. To estimate proportions when drawing, we're going to take some comparative measurements of the head of the model pictured to the left. In this case, we'll use the forehead as our reference measurement. 1. With your elbow locked, move your arm until the tip of the pencil aligns with the topmost point on the model's hairline. Now, slide your thumb down the shaft of the pencil until your thumbnail aligns with the middle of her eyebrow. 2. Now that you have the reference unit, you can compare it to another part of the subject. Starting with your arm pointed where it was when you made your measurement, and without shifting the location of your thumb on the pencil, slowly move your arm down so that the tip of the pencil is now at the middle of the model's eyebrows. Make a visual note of the new location of your thumb in relation to the model. In most cases, you will find that your thumb now falls just under the model's nose. Repeat this process again, moving the pencil so that the tip of the pencil is now where your thumbnail was, near the bottom of the model's nose. In general, the distance from the hairline to the middle of the eyebrows, from the bottom of the eyebrows to the bottom of the nose, and from the bottom of the nose to the bottom of the chin are equal. To the extent that you find they are not equal, you should aim to maintain these differences in your drawing so as to correctly capture the model's character. 3. To measure the relationship between the height and the width of the model's head, use the same unit horizontally as you used vertically. Keeping your thumbnail in the same position along the pencil shaft, simply turn your hand horizontally. Align the pencil tip with the leftmost edge of the model's head, cheekbone, and then see how many units you can fit horizontally until your thumb reaches the other side of the model's face. In this case, the distance is 2 units, which means that the width of the head is 2/3 of the height. If you were to transfer to your drawing the exact lengths that you had marked on your pencil, that would be similar to using the sight size method. The advantage of the comparative method is that it doesn't have this constraint. Use pencil to measure angles. I like to use my pencil to measure the subject's angles. In this case, you simply turn the pencil until its angle is parallel to the angled line you want to measure. Then you must maintain that orientation of the pencil as you move it over to your drawing where you can transfer the angle. Note that this technique is subject to error, because it's easy for the angle at which you are holding the pencil to shift as you move from the subject to your drawing. Thus, it's a good idea to double-check your results with vertical and horizontal measurements when possible. Use of plumb line in drawing. A plumb line is just a piece of string with a weight attached to the end to ensure it hangs straight down. Much like your pencil or brush, the plumb line forms a straight edge that you can use to measure aspects of your subject. More importantly, because the plumb line always hangs straight down, you can use it to assess the vertical alignment of elements. This can be a big help in making an accurate drawing. In the photo at left, you can use the plumb line to find the central line of the model's head. Chapter 3: Understanding the Values Scale. Of the 7 core elements of art, line, shape, form, value, space, texture, and color value is arguably the most important for creating the illusion of realism. We only see things when light strikes an object, creating a collection of values which are then reflected to our eyes. These values are influenced not just by the brightness and direction of the light source, but also by the shape, texture, color, and other elements of the object itself. Thus, an accurate rendering of values is critical to representing all of the elements of the artwork. If we are to render values accurately, we must fully understand light and how it reacts on surfaces. The goal of this chapter is to assist you in gaining this understanding, so that your artwork can deliver a more convincing three-dimensional illusion. Values and contrast. The immeasurable value of values. The form of an object is revealed to our brains based on the light that bounces off the object and is directed towards our eyes. In a two-dimensional artwork such as a drawing or a painting, we of course cannot reproduce these three-dimensional forms, but we can create the illusion of 3 dimensions by properly representing the light that is returned to the viewer's eyes. We refer to the varying amounts of lightness as values. 2 key factors that determine the amount of light returned to the viewer are the inherent brightness of the object and the amount of light that is striking it. A light gray ball is going to return to the viewer a greater percentage of the light that hits it than will a dark gray ball. But, regardless of whether the color of the ball is light or dark, portions of the ball that are in shadow will receive less light, and thus will have less light to return to the viewer. Thus, there may be a portion of the shadow region of the light gray ball that displays the same value of light as a more well-lit portion of the dark gray ball. When more light strikes an object, the contrast between light and dark values increases. The texture of an object will also affect the contrast. A very smooth surface such as a marble will appear more shiny, with a more pronounced contrast and a focused highlight, because adjacent points in the object will all bounce the light back in a similar direction. An object with a soft texture, such as a rubber ball, will tend to scatter the light in less predictable directions, creating softer highlights. And an object with a larger, recognizable texture, such as an orange, will create a subtle pattern of highlights and shadows across the entire surface. An eye for recognizing values is one of the most important skills you can develop as an artist, because it is the key to accurately representing so many aspects of your subject. From the color, shape, and texture of the object, to the nature and direction of the light sources in the scene. The anatomy of lighting. Almost any object under illumination will have the following regions which influence the value that is perceived. 1. Highlight. The highlight is the area on the object that is most directly exposed to the light source. For objects that have a consistent color, this region will always have the lightest values, in some cases approximating white. Objects A with a smooth surface will have an especially well-defined highlight. 2. Mid-tone. The mid-tone always refers to medium values between light and dark. When we are discussing lighting, this refers to the region that falls in between the highlights and the shadows. This region is receiving some light, but not at the full intensity. Often, the color and value observed in the mid-tone area appears closest to the true color and value of the object. 3. Core shadow. The core shadow is the region on the object that is partially or fully hidden from the light source. Because it receives little light, this region displays darker values of the local color. 4. Reflection light. Light doesn't just come from the original light source, it also bounces around a scene. The reflection light refers to the portion of the shadow that is receiving some secondary illumination from another surface, such as light reflecting off the tabletop. The intensity of this reflection will vary based on the nature of the surfaces. 5. Cast shadow. The cast shadow is the region on surrounding objects and surfaces that is partially or fully hidden from the light source by the subject, resulting in darker values. The shape of a cast shadow tells the viewer something about the shape of the primary subject as well as its surrounding environment. Squinting to see values and simple shapes. Shapes and values are the most basic building blocks of a drawing, but it can be hard for us to accurately judge the absolute values independent of color and form. Some artists find it very helpful to squint their eyes when determining values. Squinting your eyes tends to hide the details of a scene, so that you can more easily discern the simple shapes and values. Using a value scale in drawings. Many artists use a value scale as they work, identifying specific values and adding them in appropriate spots. When using a value scale, you can be sure that you create a full range of value. Artworks that show a full range of values are more likely to be successful. It doesn't matter what type of art you are creating. As long as there are dark values in harmony with light values, your artwork will most likely be aesthetically pleasing. A full range of values means that there are ample amounts of light values, called tints, and dark values, called shades. There is an infinite variation of values, but most artists like to think of a finite scale, 0 to 7, 9 or 10. It's more manageable that way and it makes it a lot easier to communicate. If we were to take out all color, we would still see 5. The woman and recognize it as a person. In other words, we are just showing the values of a figure. If we take this one step further and isolate 9 of the values, we can see where we would need to draw or paint the values. Shading is the process of creating values in your artwork that simulate form, brightness, and illumination. Effective shade creates the illusion of depth, communicating the three-dimensional shapes in your subject and delivering a more convincing image. Given the importance of shading in creating a realistic artwork, it should be no surprise to learn that artists have developed a wide variety of shading techniques. Different shading techniques may create different styles of artwork, yet a careful attention to proper values will still produce a strong sense of realism. You'll find it useful to experiment with multiple methods. Here are some of the most common. Slinky. The slinky shading technique is probably among the first techniques that most artists discover naturally. It is achieved by making quick back and forth motions with your pencil across the paper. This technique is particularly useful for quick sketches, but you may find it is a bit harder to control for subtle detail. Smooth shading. This technique generally creates the strongest sense of realism, because it creates graduated shading without noticeable pencil strokes. Achieving complete smoothness without noticeable strokes or edges can require significant practice to master. You want to use soft strokes and a light touch, and you can build up darker values by adding additional layers or pressing a bit harder with your pencil. You can also hold your pencil so that the side strokes the paper in order to cover a larger region. In some cases, you may want to use a cloth or a piece of tissue to blend the shaded area and create an even smoother effect. Cross-hatching. For this technique, you apply consistent strokes in a parallel direction, and then overlay those strokes with another set of parallel strokes in a different direction. You control the values by varying the spacing of the strokes rather than their thickness or intensity. Spacing the strokes farther apart creates lighter values, and more tightly spaced strokes create darker values. The cross-hatching technique is particularly useful for drawing with a pen or a marker that doesn't allow for smooth shading or blending. Stippling. Stippling is another technique that is often used with pens, though of course you can use it with other media as well. It is also known as pointillism, because it involves placing a series of points, or dots, on the paper. Values are controlled just as they are with cross-hatching. Placing the dots closer together creates darker values, whereas greater spacing results in lighter values. Chapter 4. Blocking in. The most important and foundational stage of drawing is the blocking in stage, because it establishes the placement and proportions of the head and its facial features. You can similarly specify the placement of shadow shapes during the block-in phase, thereby creating a better sense of three-dimensionality. A well-executed block-in will make the rest of the drawing process much easier. The goal of blocking in is to create simplified representation of the subject that communicates general composition, proportions, and angles. You should use only straight lines when blocking in, because such lines make angles, lengths, and proportions much easier to evaluate, and it's critical to get these things right before you begin to add detail. You can worry about refining your drawing with curves once you get beyond the blocking in stage. Demo 1, Madeline. For this first demo, I will guide you how to start a portrait in profile with blocking in technique. Please keep in mind, your skill and speed at blocking in will improve with practice. As you block in, you're training yourself both to see the most important features and represent them in broad strokes. This ability to see and work broadly is critical for an artist. The model here is one of my favorite models, Madeline. For this exercise, I use Strathmore drawing paper and 2B medium charcoal pencil. Step 1. To start my drawing, I keep in mind that I will work from general to specific. This means that I will start with the largest, most general measurements, such as the height and width of Madeline's head. Later I will move on to smaller measurements, such as her forehead and her cheekbone, and finally get to the smallest, most specific ones, such as her nose, eye, lips. 2. But first, I need to specify how large I want my drawing to be on the paper. L will help me to control the composition for my drawing. Using the comparative measurement technique, I measure the distance from the chin to the top of the head, picture 1. I put down 2 landmarks to indicate the height of Madeline's head, and its position on the paper, AB line. Note that the height of AB on my paper should represent the size I want Madeline's head to be in my drawing. It can be larger or smaller than my original measurement, but any subsequent marks I make on the paper must follow these same proportions. Step 2. To determine the width of her head, I simply use the measurement of the height, AB line, and compare it to the distance from the top of her nose to the back of her hair, CD line. I notice that the width is slightly longer than the height, and indicate this on my drawing, picture 2. Step 3. The next step is visualizing the angles of the head. I like to use my pencil to measure the subject's angles. In this case, you simply turn the pencil until its angle is parallel to the angled line you want to measure. Then you must maintain that orientation of the pencil as you move it over to your drawing, where you can transfer the angle, picture 3. At this stage I use straight lines to create the angles of the head. The reason is that it will help me to focus on the large shapes and forms, rather than details. Step 4. The asterisk negative space is the area outside of the contours of your subject. During the block-in stage, it can be helpful to visualize this negative space as an abstract shape. Step 5. To start drawing the contour of the profile, I imagine a vertical line at the front of Madeline's chin. This helps me to see how far the lips, nose and forehead extend to either side of the line. Step 6. I measure the distances from her hairline to the middle of her eyebrows, from the eyebrows to the bottom of the nose, and from the bottom of the nose to the bottom of her chin. Those distances are equal in length. Step 7. I continue blocking in the large shapes of the face and later break into smaller shapes. Once I'm confident in the placement of the features, I begin constructing them anatomically. In this stage, draw what I see, and I also draw what no. Sometimes you can't see the features clearly because they're hidden by the shadow or washed out by the light. It's helpful if you learn and practice drawing the features, so that you can fill in these visual gaps. Step 8. I continue to construct her features, drawing the shadow shapes and indicating the differences in edge quality. I also double-check the measurements CF her features to make sure that I can get her character and her likeness. Here is the completed block-in for Madeline's portrait. Demo 2, John. For this second blocking in demo, I'll start it with a 3/4 view. Use a graphite 2B pencil and Strathmore drawing paper for this demonstration. Step 1. Using the comparative measurement technique, I measure the distance from the top of John's head to the bottom of his chin, which is covered by his beard, first photo. To determine the width of John's head, I simply use the measurement of the height and compare it to the width, bounded on the left from the back of his ear and on the right from the edge of his beard beyond the mouth. I notice that the width is just a bit smaller than the height, and indicate this on my drawing, second photo. Step 2. Next, I measure the distances from the top of John's head to the middle of his eyebrows, A, from the middle of his eyebrows to the bottom of his nose, B, and from the bottom of his nose to the bottom of his chin, C. Picture 3. Notice that the A distance is the longest in length, and the B distance is the shortest one. The C distance is shorter than A and a bit longer than B. Step 3. One of the most important steps for the blocking in stage is drawing the planes of the head. It helps you to draw more accurately and it also helps you to build the head three-dimensionally. Step 4. Continue blocking in the large shapes of John's head and later break into smaller shapes. Once I'm confident in the placement of the features, I begin constructing them anatomically. It's time for me to block in the shadow areas as well. Step 5. With a solid block-in, like a strong foundation for building a house, you can continue to work on the details and values of the portrait until it's fully completed. Here is the completed block-in for John's portrait. Demo 3, Steve. In this demonstration, I'd like to show you how to block in a portrait in frontal view. I use pastel pencil on Sennelier Lacarte sanded paper for this demo. Step 1. Using the comparative measurement technique, I first measure the distance from the top of Steve's head to the bottom of his beard, AB line. Next, aligning with the bottom of his nose, I measure the distance from the left of his beard to the right of his beard, CD line. I notice that the AB line is twice the CD line in length. I also draw the center line of Steve's head. Notice that the center line is tilted to the left. I also measure the distances from the hairline to the middle of the eyebrows, A, from the eyebrows to the bottom of his nose, B, and from the bottom of his nose to the bottom of his chin, C, which is covered by his beard. The distance is the longest distance, and B and C are equal in length. Step 2. After carefully measuring Steve's head, I'm confident to place his facial features. The eyes are almost exactly centered between the top of his head and the bottom of his chin. The wings of his nose extend to align with the tear ducts. The corners of his mouth roughly align with the center of his irises. Step 3. Now I can focus on the planes of Steve's head. To do so, I break big shapes into smaller shapes, such as Steve's forehead, cheekbones, and beard. The placement of these planes is very important for the visualization of the structure of Steve's head in 3 dimensions. Step 4. At this step, I block in the shadow areas. I continue to construct his features, drawing the shadow shapes and indicating the differences in edge sharpness. I also double-check the measurements of Steve's features to make sure that I accurately capture his character and likeness. After finishing the blocking in stage, I continue to work on the details and values of this portrait of Steve. The time spent on this drawing from start to finish was approximately 12 hours. Steve. Cuong Nguyen, 2018. Pastel pencil on Sennelier Lacarte paper. Demo 4, Marcello. For this demo of Marcello, I use 2B and 4B graphite pencil on Strathmore drawing paper. Step 1. To map the position of the head, use the comparative measurement technique to measure the height of Marcello's head, from the top of his hat to the bottom of his beard, and then compare this distance to the width of his head, measured from his glasses to the back of his hat. Once I've marked the measurements on paper, simply use a 2B pencil to define the boundaries and outline of the head. Step 2. Next, I start placing Marcello's facial features. Step 3. I continue to block in shadow areas with a 2B pencil. Step 4. I switch to a 4B pencil to add value to the dark areas and further refine the middle tone areas. Step 5. Final block-in stage. Chapter 5. Head construction. To be an effective portrait artist, you must understand your subject. Knowledge of the human skull is fundamental to an artist's ability to draw realistic faces. The skull provides the internal structure for the head and anchors the facial muscles, ultimately defining the contours of the face and the shape of the head. Leonardo da Vinci was likely the first artist to engage in deep investigations of anatomy in order to improve his ability to render the human figure. Today, anatomy is a required subject in many traditional art schools and ateliers. Once you understand the structure of the skull, you'll find it easier to see and interpret the facial contours of your subjects so that you can draw them more accurately. There are two primary parts to the skull. Most of the skull is composed of a single, fixed portion that includes the frontal bone, the cheekbones, and the upper jaw. The bottom part consists of the lower jaw, which can open and close. Forehead. The forehead is the region of the head bounded on the top and sides by the hairline and on the bottom by the eyebrow ridge. Temple. The temples are the side regions of the head between the eyes and the ears. On the skull, the temples are the regions where four bones meet: the frontal, parietal, temporal, and sphenoid bones. Temple line. Where the sphenoid bone meets the frontal bone, it creates a ridge, which often becomes more noticeable as people age. You may notice this ridge beginning near the edge of the brow ridge and traveling up and back towards the hairline. Brow ridge. The brow ridge, also known as the supraorbital arch, is a bony ridge above the eye sockets, upon which the eyebrows sit. Cheekbones, also known as the zygomatic arch, the cheekbones sit below the temples, extending back towards the opening of the ears. The cheekbones play a significant role in defining someone's appearance, and they tend to vary based on ethnicity. For example, Asians tend to have larger and more prominent cheekbones than Caucasians. Nasal bones. The nasal bones are two small, oblong bones that meet to form the bridge of the nose. They play a larger role in defining the shape of the nose and hence the appearance of the individual. The maxilla, and having the basic form of a half-cylinder, the upper jaw sits at the front base of the main portion of the skull. It frames the mouth and holds the teeth. Lower jaw, also called the mandible. The lower jaw is not only the lowest bone in the human face but also the strongest. Like the maxilla, it frames the mouth and holds the teeth, but unlike the maxilla, it is the only movable bone of the skull. Eye socket. The eye sockets are the bony cavities in the skull that hold the eyes. An eye socket is also sometimes referred to as an orbit, though that term can be applied both to the socket and to its contents. Now that you have a basic understanding of the structure of the head, it's time to discuss how to divide the head into planes. Constructing the head from planes encourages you to think about your drawing as a three-dimensional volume, rather than just a flat image of the portion of the head visible from your vantage point. The Acero head. The Acero head is a 3D model created by John Acero that depicts a useful way to divide the head into individual planes. Working with this model is perhaps the best way to understand the shading of the head and to see how light is reflected off of the head's surfaces. We often think of the head as roughly spherical, but working with the exaggerated planes and angles of the Acero head makes it easier to comprehend the complexity of the head's shape. If you can obtain a physical model of the Acero head, it can be very useful to practice drawing it from different angles and under different lighting conditions. Even just using a reference photo, as we'll do in this next exercise, can be helpful practice. Acero head exercise. Study the photos and the accompanying illustrations on this page, paying careful attention to how the planes in the illustrations correspond with the shading in the original photos. Tip: the best way to distinguish the planes is to view your subject with a single light source. Key things to look for in this challenge: 1. How do the planes help to build the structure of the head? 2. How does the light source impact the visibility of the planes? 3. How many planes are represented within each feature? In this drawing I use Acero's head as a guide for drawing the planes of this model's head. Using this technique helps to draw and build the shapes and forms more accurately. After using Acero's head as guidance for a while, you will start seeing the planes without thinking about the Acero head. It will become your second nature when it comes to head drawing. If you want to learn how to draw accurately, you need to learn about the planes and structures of the head instead of focusing only on the outlines. The Loomis Method. For beginning artists, I highly recommend the book, Drawing the Head and Hands, by Andrew Loomis. This book begins by introducing a deceptively simple method for constructing the head and for ensuring that all the features are correctly placed. Andrew Loomis developed a method of simplifying the human head to its most basic features. This method provides some general guidelines of proportions and forms. Much like techniques for linear perspective, it applies geometric forms to guide you in maintaining proper proportions. William Andrew Loomis worked as an illustrator, author, and art instructor during the first half of the 20th century. His commercial work was featured prominently in advertising and magazines, but today he is best known as the author of a series of instructional art books. Loomis' method continues to influence many artists around the world. Practicing the Loomis method. Man's head in frontal view. 1. Draw a ball. Divide the ball vertically into 6 equal parts. 2. With an imaginary knife, cut off the sides of the ball to represent the side planes of the head. Position these 2 cuts so that they fully intersect only the middle 4 parts that you established in step 1, while leaving the top and bottom parts intact. The top part of the circle, above the 2 cuts, indicates where the hairline should be. The bottoms of the ears and the nose should sit just above the bottom part of the circle. Next, draw horizontal and vertical lines that both intersect the center of the circle. The vertical line will correspond with the middle of the nose, while the horizontal line will indicate the middle of the brow. The distance from the hairline to the eyebrows, from the eyebrows to the bottom of the nose, and from the bottom of the nose to the bottom of the chin are equal. The chin, thus, lies outside of the circle. Mark this location with your pencil. 3. Next, draw the jawline by connecting the line from the bottom of the ears to the chin line. Now you can see a simple head. 4. It's time to place all of the features inside the head. 5. Now add more details to the facial features. 6. Finished drawing of a man's head. Practicing the Loomis method. Man's head in profile. 1. Draw a circle. Imagine the height of the circle is divided into 6 equal parts. You can make small marks if it's helpful to you. Then draw a second circle, representing the side plane of the head, inside the first that encompasses the middle 4 parts. Next, draw 2 lines through the center of the large circle that divide it into 4 equal quarters. Line AB represents the tilt of the head. It will be vertical if the model is holding their head straight. Line CD is perpendicular to AB. Helpfully, it will indicate the rough position of the eyebrows and the tops of the ears. 2. The top of the inside circle indicates the hairline, the center line indicates the eyebrows, and the bottom line indicates the bottom of the nose. Duplicate the distance between 2 of those features to place the bottom of the chin line. In general, the distances from the hairline to the middle of the eyebrows, from the eyebrows to the bottom of the nose, and from the bottom of the nose to the bottom of the chin are equal in length. 3. Connect the line from the eyebrows to the chin, and draw the jawline by connecting the line from the chin to the bottom of AB line. Now you can see the shape of a simple head appears. 4. Now place all of the features inside the head. The top of the ear aligns with the eyebrow, and the bottom of the ear aligns with the bottom of the nose. You can find the eyes by placing your mark halfway between the top of the head and the bottom of the chin. The middle line of the lips is slightly above the middle distance from the bottom of the nose to the bottom of the chin. 5. Next, work a bit more on the details of the facial features. 6. Finished drawing of a man head. Note, the Loomis method helps you to identify the ideal proper tie-ins in a face, but keep in mind that there will still be individual variance from person to person. When you draw a live model, you can use the Loomis proportions as a starting point, but then adjust them for the actual proportions of your model so as to capture their unique character. Chapter 6. Studying the features. Still recall the teachings of my master in Vietnam from when I was just 12 years old. He emphasized to my class that we would never be able to master lifelike portraiture without devoting time to understanding individual facial features. We spent countless hours drawing eyes, noses, and lips repeatedly, so that we could develop an intuitive understanding of the structure and anatomy of these features. Today, as a teacher, I say to my students exactly what our master told us many years ago. You need to draw at least 100 eyes before you can execute an effective portrait. In this step-by-step guide, I will show you how to recreate every aspect of a human face, the eyes, nose, mouth, and ears. Encourage you to learn all you can from this, and then practice, practice, practice. Drawing the eyes. The eyes are the most important feature on the face, because they show the feeling and the expression of the model. There are many components to the eye and all of them are important. Here are a few hints to help you. The iris and the pupil are perfect circles when the eye is looking straight at you. If the eyes are turning away or looking up or down, they become ellipses. The pupil is always perfectly centered within the iris. The pupil is the darkest part of the eye. Both eyes should be looking in the same direction. The irises should be of the same size and color. The white of the eye, sclera, is never pure white, and it needs to be blended to resemble a sphere shape. Drawing the eye, frontal view. Step 1. To start, I simply use straight lines block in the shape of the eye. Step 2. After blocking in, I create the outline drawing of the eye. Step 3. Next, fill in the shadow areas, such as the corner of the eye, the eyebrow, and the iris. Step 4. Apply dark values in the iris. The reflection in the eye will be the lightest area, so in this case I leave it as the paper color. Step 5. I continue to darken the pupil, iris, eyelashes and eyebrow. Shade the white of the eye to make it look rounded like a sphere. Step 6. Blend the skin areas of the drawing to create the form and contours, and then add the eyelashes with very quick strokes to finish. Drawing the eye, upward-looking eye. Step 1. I use straight lines to block in the shape of the eye. Step 2. I then create the outline of the eye. Remember, the eye is looking up, so the shape of the iris becomes an ellipse. Step 3. Next, I darken the iris and the shadow areas. Step 4. I shade the white of the eye to make it look rounded like a sphere. Step 5. Use an eraser on the iris and on the sclera to lighten the values, creating highlights. Step 6. I add the eyelashes with very quick strokes at the end. Drawing the nose. The nose is one of the essential features of a person, because it's right in the center of the face. The shape of the nose is a defining aspect of an individual's character, so it needs to be drawn with care. Here are a few tips to help you. If you draw a vertical line down from the corner of the eye, it will typically line up with the edge of the wing of the nose. This can change according to different ethnicities. The distance from the middle of the eyebrows to the bottom of the nose in general is equal to the distance from the hairline to the middle of the eyebrows, and from the bottom of the nose to the bottom of the chin. In general, men have bigger and longer noses than women. Drawing the nose, frontal. Step 1. To start, I use straight lines to block in the shape of the nose. Step 2. Next, I create the outline drawing of the nose. Step 3. Fill in the shadow areas with darker values. Step 4. Blend the tones smooth with a stump. I also use a kneaded eraser to add the highlight on the tip of the nose. Step 5. I darken the corners of the eyes and the cast shadow under the nose. Here is the final drawing. Drawing the nose, 3/4 view. Step 1. To start, use straight lines to block in the shape of the nose. Step 2. Next, I create the outlines of the nose. Step 3. I darken the shadow areas, such as the corners of the eyes, and the cast shadow under the nose. Step 4. I blend the tones smooth with a stump. Use a kneaded eraser to create the highlights on the tip and the bridge of the nose. Step 5. Continue to shade and blend the tones. To make it smoother, you can use a paper towel or even your fingers. Step 6. Here is the final drawing. Drawing the nose, side view. Step 1. I'll use straight lines to block in the shape of the in profile. Step 2. Next, I draw the outlines of the nose. Step 3. I fill in the shadow areas such as the corners of the eyes and the cast shadow under the nose with darker value. Step 4. I use the stump to blend tones. I use a kneaded eraser to remove some of the tones on the tip and the bridge of the nose to create highlights. Step 5. I continue blending the tones. Step 6. Final drawing. Mouth diagram. Drawing the mouth. Many beginning artists find that drawing the mouth can be a challenge, and they often outline them too strongly. In real life, the edges of the lips are soft and blend in with the skin. It's only when the lips are defined by makeup that the edges are very distinct. Here are a few hints to help you. Lips come in different shapes and sizes, often reflecting different ethnicities. The upper lip has an M shape. In general, it's smaller and will appear darker than the bottom lip. The corners of the mouth show the expression of the model. The corners move up when someone is smiln, and go down when someone is sad. Drawing the lips with different angles. Step 1. To start, I simply make landmarks to identify the upper and lower lips. The vertical line divides the mouth in half, and the middle horizontal line represents the open line and the corner of the mouth. Step 2. Next, draw the outlines of the lips. I also fill in the shadow areas with darker values. Step 3. The final step is blending and shading the tones. I use the kneaded eraser to create the highlights on the lower lip. Step 1. Similar to the first drawing, but notice that the vertical line now is shifted to the right, because it's a 3/4 view. Step 2. I continue to draw the outlines of the lips. After that, I fill in the shadow areas with darker values. Step 3. I use a stump to blend the tones. Notice that the upper lip is thinner and darker than the bottom lip. Step 1. I'll use straight lines to draw the shape of the mouth in profile. Step 2. Next, draw the outlines and fill in the shadow areas with darker values. Step 3. Blend and shade the tones, using a knead eraser to create highlights on the lower lip. Drawing the ear. Step 1. I use straight lines to block in the shape of the ear. Step 2. After blocking in the shape, continue to draw the outlines. I always look for the inner ear, which has an area that resembles a Y. Step 3. Fill in shadow areas with darker values. I also pay attention to the transition of its form and shapes. Step 4. Use stump to blend to make the tones smoother. Use kneader eraser to create highlights on the top and inner ear. Drawing the ears. Ears are made up of strange shapes and, for most of us, they are one of the most difficult features to draw. We don't particularly pay much attention to ears unless they have unusual features or adornments which attract our eyes. To draw a good portrait, you must learn the anatomy of ears to make them look convincing. You should practice drawing them from a variety of angles to prepare yourself for representing different poses of a model. Here are a few hints to help you. The outer ear overlaps the inner ear. The inner ear has an area that resembles a Y. Look for it in every ear you draw. The skin of the ear is translucent and more shiny. The earlobe often resembles a sphere. Chapter 7. Cast Study. When I was trained at the Academy of Art in Vietnam, the first year was devoted entirely to drawing from plaster casts. In fact, cast drawing has been one of the most critical foundations for training artists since at least the time of the Renaissance. That's because cast drawing prepares the artist for facing a live model while eliminating some of the complexity. To draw a cast, an artist must develop an understanding of proportion, perspective, volume, and value, but can do so without the variables of color and subtle movement that a live model introduces. With a plaster cast, it is much easier to distinguish textures and values. The artist can focus on composition, line, gesture, and shading and learn how to use these to construct convincing volumes. Plus, despite the apparent absence of color, the artist will gradually learn how to see color even in black and white. Effective cast drawing requires practice, but the skills you develop through cast drawing exercises will provide a foundation for all forms of drawing and painting. As you increase your comfort with cast drawing, you'll find that it becomes easier for you to face the challenge of a live model as well. But cast drawing isn't something that you conquer and then abandon. Even experienced artists will find value in coming back to cast drawing again and again to polish and develop their skills, improving their ability to recognize subtle forms and textures. I myself return to cast drawing often, and each time I find that I'll learn new things. Step 1. Blocking in shapes and forms. Step 2. Adding white pencil to define values. Step 3. Continue working on values and details. Step 4. Finished drawing. For me, drawing is a form of construction on a two-dimensional plane. This is how I compare building a drawing to building a house. Step 1. Foundation. Step 2. Framework is done. Step 3. All of the walls, doors, and windows are in. Step 4. Final details installed. Time to move in. Step 1. Drawing stage. Step 2. Blocking in the shadows. Step 3. Values stage. The simple beauty of cast drawings, as well as the educational value, is that they reveal forms solely through light and shadow. As you spend time with cast drawing, your skill in understanding the three-dimensional form of your subjects will inevitably improve. You'll learn how to reproduce values more accurately while refining your measurement techniques as well. One of my favorite mediums for cast drawing is Carbothello pastel pencils. I select a range of pencils with values including black, dark gray, light gray, and white. It's a fantastic medium with which to build up layers. I also use Sennelier Lacarte sandpaper because it can hold many layers of pastel. Chapter 8. Copying Masterworks. Though every artist should strive to evolve their own personal style, there is still a great deal that can be learned through the practice of copying the work of the old masters who produced artworks before the 18th century. This practice may have fallen out of favor in many art schools of today, but it was once a fundamental component of classical art training, and with good reason. Copying a masterwork forces you to analyze the work in a different way, deconstructing it so that you can produce the same effect on your own. In the process of reproducing a variety of works that you admire, you're bound to discover new techniques that you can adapt and incorporate into your personal work. Often, you'll find that your drawing skill will improve more rapidly during this copying process than it does when working on your original art. You can then harness these improved skills to your own creativity. Successfully copying an artwork requires you to ask yourself a very specific question about how the original was produced. How did the artist start the drawing? What kind of paper and pencils did the artist use? What direction is the pencil stroke going? What technique did he or she use to shade the shadow areas? Are the edges soft or hard? Finding the answers to these questions will lead you to a deeper understanding of drawing technique. When you're done creating your copy, be sure to sign it with the appropriate attribution, so as to avoid the appearance of plagiarism or forgery. For example, signing the work Jane Doe, after Leonardo da Vinci, makes it clear who created the copy while also pointing the viewer towards the creator of the original work. Lastly, note that you can only legally copy works that are already in the public domain. In this regard, any work created by the old masters is a safe subject. Getting started. It's important for you to find the right work to copy. First of all, make sure it's a work that you love. You're going to be analyzing it in great detail, so it needs to inspire you and keep you motivated. The goal of the exercise is learning, so pick a work that has qualities you hope to emulate in your own work. It's also important that you work from a high-quality image that represents the full detail and tonal gradations of the original. A poor quality image will hinder opportunities for learning and will inevitably lead to frustration. Particularly high-quality images can often be found in exhibition catalogs or in poster-sized reproductions, and some museums now provide high-resolution images on their websites. If you can't find a high-quality source image for a desired work, then you may want to consider choosing a different artwork. Consider toning your paper as well. The old masters rarely had access to pure white paper. Toning your paper to a neutral shade can more closely emulate the look of the original, while also helping you to control the values in your reproduction. Copy after the heads and hands of two apostles. Cuong Nguyen, 2018. Conti Pencil on Arches BFK Rives Paper. Chapter 9. Demonstrations. Demo 1, Portrait of Megan. Materials. Paper, Strathmore 500 Series, Steel Gray. Pencils, General Charcoal, 2B Medium, 4B Medium, 6B Soft. Additional tools, Soft Tool, Soft Brush. Step 1. To start block in, I measure the height and the width of her head and simply draw the outline shape, using the envelope technique with my 2B Medium pencil. The outline at this point doesn't have to be perfect. I mostly use all straight lines to define the boundaries of her head. Step 2. After that, I draw the center line of her face and divide it into 3 parts vertically, from the hairline to the eyebrows, A, from the eyebrows to the bottom of her nose, B, and from the bottom of her nose to the bottom of her chin, C. Notice that for Megan parts B and C are equal in length, while part A is slightly shorter. Step 3. Next I start to break down the envelope into smaller shapes. I simply make landmarks of her facial features. No details are needed at this point. Step 4. Start the process of blocking in the portrait by filling the shadow areas with 2B Medium pencil. Step 5. Use a flat soft brush and lightly brush off my drawing to soften the outlines before, can correct it and add more precise details. Step 6. It's time for me to draw her facial features in more detail. I start with her eyes, then her nose and finally her lips. I use my 4B pencil for this stage. Step 7. Now I add some highlights by using my white chalk pencil. The reason to add the highlight at this time is because it helps me to see the values of her face more clearly. Step 8. Use my 4B Medium pencil to fill in her hair and the shadow areas a little darker. Step 9. To blend the big areas, use the soft tool knife. The areas become softer and smoother. Step 10. Now I can focus on the details of her facial features. I pay special attention to the eyes, including her iris and her upper and lower lids. As they say, the eyes are the window to the soul, and this is entirely true in the art of portraiture. Step 11. After finishing her facial features, I continue to focus on the values. I add darker values in the shadow areas with my 4B Medium pencil. Step 12. Use my white chalk pencil to make the highlights on her nose, her forehead, her cheekbones and her lips a little bit stronger. Step 13. I use the soft tool knife to soften her hair a little bit more. Step 14. Use my 6B soft pencil to add darker values on her hair and the shadow area around her neck. Step 15. To make her head pop out from the paper, use my white chalk pencil to lighten up the background with a cross-hatching technique. Step 16 and Step 17, I continue work on the values on her face. Remember, values are extremely important. I use 4B and 6B pencils to focus on the shadow and mid-tone areas. I also use white chalk pencil to lighten up the values where needed, such as the highlights on her chin, her nose, and her cheekbones. Demo 2, Portrait of Philip. Materials. Paper, Strathmore 500 series, steel gray. Pencils, General Charcoal, 2B medium, 4B medium, 6B soft. Additional tools, soft tool, soft brush. Step 1. I draw the center of his face and then use the comparative measuring technique to measure the distances from his hairline to the middle of his eyebrows, A, from the middle of his eyebrows to the bottom of his nose, B, and from the bottom of his nose to the bottom of his beard, C. I notice that part C is longer than A and B. Step 2. I start breaking the big shapes into smaller shapes. Understanding the planes of the head is very helpful for this process. I mostly focus on shapes and forms at this point. Pay special attention to the shapes of his cheekbones and his jaw lines. This will help me to get his likeness later on. Step 3. Using a 4B pencil, I start to add values to the dark areas and further refine the mid-tone areas. Step 4. The advantage of using a light gray paper is that I can use a white chalk pencil to create highlights. With a light pressure, I define the highlights on Philip's nose, forehead, cheekbones, eyelids, and so on. Step 5. Continuing with my 4B pencil, I refine his facial features. I render the details of variation in values and edges, and I transition and connect the different planes in local areas. Step 6. Use my 4B pencil to adjust the values in the mid-tone areas. To make the transition smoother, use the soft tool to blend the borders between the shadows and mid-tones. Step 7. To darken the value of Philip's shirt, use a 6B pencil. He also used the soft tool to blend the value. Step 8. I switch back to my 4B pencil to work on the details of his facial features. I also add some darker values on his beard and hair. Step 9. For the final stage, use 4B and 6B pencils and white chalk pencil to control the values. To make the facial part stand out, I darken the shadow areas and add more white pencil on the highlights. I also pay attention to the midtones by blending them smoothly to the shadows and highlights, because this enriches the entire drawing. Demo 3, Portrait of Ronnie. Materials. Paper, Strathmore 500 series, steel gray. Pencils, General Charcoal, 2B medium, 4B medium, 6B soft. Additional tools, soft tool, soft brush. Step 1. The first step in this demo is to block in the shapes of Ronnie's head. Use my 2B medium pencil for this step. Map the position of the head by marking the top, bottom, left and right boundaries. Step 2. At this stage, I focus on studying and exploring the proportions and relations of the shapes. Step 3. After the initial block-in, I start defining Ronnie's facial features. I also use my 4B pencil to add darker values in the shadow areas. Step 4. For defining Ronnie's facial features, I start adding mid-tone values with my 2B pencil. Step 5. I continue to use a white chalk pencil to create highlights, such as on Ronnie's nose, cheekbones, and forehead. At this stage, I use stronger pressure to make the highlights stand out. Step 6. continue working on the highlight values with my white chalk pencil, using a cross-hatching technique on Ronnie's forehead, cheekbones, and nose with a light pressure. Step 7. Work on the details of Ronnie's facial features, and I also use the soft tool to blend the transition between mid-tone and shadow areas. Step 8. At this stage, focus on refining the shadows. I continue to reinforce the boundaries between light and dark on the chin to make them more solid. I also use a soft brush to blend the skin tones. Step 9. I make some final adjustments to Ronnie's head. Some places require reinforcement, and I want to make sure that every part 15 consistent overall, and that the drawing has variations in values and clear relationships between the planes of the forms. I also use white chalk pencil to add stronger highlights on the nose, as well as details on Ronnie's mustache. Demo 4, Woman in a Head Wrap. Materials: paper, Canson me tints, sand, pencils, Conti pencils, umber sanguine, Conti stick, umber, sanguine. Additional tools: paper towel, soft brushes. For this demonstration, I'd like to show you how to create a portrait in a different medium. I'm going to use Conti stick, Conti pencils, soft pastel and white chalk pencil for this drawing. The model is Madeline, my all-time favorite model. Step 1. To start this drawing, I use soft pastel, sanguine color, to draw the rough boundaries of Madeline's head. I use straight lines to define the dividing line between the front and side of the face. Step 2. Next, I use a piece of paper towel and lightly rub it on top of my drawing to remove all the lines. With this technique, I can create soft edges at the beginning stage. Step 3. Switching to Conti stick, sanguine color. I use straight lines to define large areas where planes connect and create shadow areas, such as the eye sockets, under the nose, along the cheekbones. Step 4. I continue to use Conti stick to define Madeline's facial features. Remember, blocking in doesn't mean drawing only the outlines of the subject, you should add volume as well. Step 5. At this stage, I'm focusing on capturing the form and volume of Madeline's head by defining large blocks. Define the size, shape, height, width and length of these blocks. Step 6. After having a solid foundation, I'm now confident to work on the details of Madeline's facial features. I use Conti pencil, umber, at this stage. I pay extra attention to the proportions of the eyebrows, eyes, and nose and re-examine the symmetry and relationships of those features. Step 7. Since the paper used in this drawing is middle tone, you can create highlights by using white chalk pencil. First, I add some light touches on her nose, the lightest point in Madeline's face. Later add more white chalk pencil on her forehead, cheekbones, and chin. Step 8. Next, I use a small soft brush to soften the lines and edges of Madeline's features. Step 9. Switching back to Conti pencil, umber, I create darker values in the shadow areas, such as the shadows under her head wrap, at the corners of her eyes, under her nose, and under her lips and chin. Step 10. At this point, I reinforce the boundaries between light and dark on Madeline's face. To do so, I use white chalk pencil to brighten the values in the mid-tone areas. This is a process of repetition, and I'll continue to work on it until I'm happy with the transition from dark to light. At the same time, I pay attention to strokes. For example, there are hard and soft edges in the highlights and shadows of the nose. I'm careful to ensure that they don't all look the same. Step 11. It's time to refine the edges. They should have rhythm and variation. To accomplish this, I use a paper towel to soften the line of Madeline's head wrap. I also want to make sure there is a relationship between the front and back of her head wrap. The front should be sharper than the back. Step 12. I use Conti stick to add darker values on the shadows of Madeline's head wrap. Step 13. At this final stage, I need to examine the drawing as a whole. I'll assess whether anything is missing, such as highlights, and I decide what level of detail is appropriate rather than unnecessary. In this case, I just use white chalk pencil to create some simple strokes to represent the embroidery on her head wrap, and I call the drawing finished. Demo 5, Portrait of Sean. Materials. Paper, Strathmore 500 series, steel gray. Pencils, General Charcoal, 2B medium, 4B. Medium, 6B soft. Additional tools, soft tool, soft brush. Step 1, I use my 2B medium pencil to start this demonstration. I measure the height of Sean's head and compare it with the width. After I have that relationship, I can start to define the boundaries of his head by using straight lines. Next, I draw the middle line that goes through the forehead, the nose, and the chin. Step 2, based on the boundaries, the middle line and the dividing lines between the major planes of the head, now I can more easily understand the relationship between the eyes, the nose, and the lines for the mouth. I notice that the height of Sean's ear is the same as the distance from the eyebrows to the bottom of his nose. Step 3, it's important to identify the planes of the head. Constructing a portrait on two-dimensional paper but making the drawing look three-dimensional requires some knowledge about human anatomy, and it will take some time to learn to see these planar zones. Step 4. Next, use a 4B medium pencil to block in the shadow areas, such as the shadows on his cheekbone and jawline, his eye sockets, and his nose. I use medium pressure at this stage. Step 5. It's time to create the highlights. Since the paper used for this drawing is middle tone, I use white chalk pencil to add the highlights. I start with his nose and his forehead, and then move to his cheekbones and chin, and some on his scarf. I use very light pressure at this stage. Step 6. Use a medium soft brush to blend the shadow areas. Even though I've used only medium pressure with my 4B pencil on the shadow areas, the value appears much darker after I use the brush to blend it. Step 7. During this stage, also shade the mid-tone values with my 2B pencil. I add darker values with a 6B pencil in some places, such as at the corners of the eyes, the side of Sean's face, and some on his hair. To smooth it out, I blend with the soft brush. In some cases, I need to make the midtones a little brighter, so use a lighter charcoal pencil and even a little of the white chalk pencil. You can see that I darken the value of the background by adding strokes with a cross-hatching technique. With these darker strokes, I can visually bring Sean's face forward. Step 8. At this stage, I work on the details of the drawing, starting with Sean's eyes. Later work on his nose and lips. For the art of portraiture, the eyes are extremely important, so pay special attention here. I like to work on both eyes at the same time to avoid the common mistake of drawing the eyes out of alignment. Step 9. When you work on the hair, it's a good idea to aim for representing an impression of the hair rather than drawing hairs one by one. I use my 6B pencil for this stage. I pay attention to the hair blocks, the shapes, and the relationship between the hair and the skull. The hair should gracefully cover the skull, not pop out of it. A common mistake made by some artists is to make the hair look like a wig. Step 10. To create the highlights for Sean's hair, I use the kneaded eraser to lift off some of the charcoal. Later, I use white chalk pencil to add a few soft strokes on top of the highlight areas. Next, I use my 6B pencil to add darker values on Sean's scarf and use the soft knife to blend them. You can also use paper towels to blend if you don't have a soft knife. Step 11. To reinforce the boundaries between light and dark on the chin, the cheekbones, and the forehead, I use my white chalk pencil to add some highlights with a cross-hatching technique. I also add stronger highlights on his nose and his lower lip. Step 12. At this final stage, I need to examine the drawing as a whole. I use a soft brush to blend the edges and soften some areas, such as the location where the hair meets the skull. I also add some details on his scarf. It's very hard to know how to stop a drawing. A drawing will never be exactly like the subject, and it doesn't have to be. Remember, you are creating a work of art, and it's a drawing, not a photograph. Chapter 10. Gallery of Drawings. The preceding tutorials demonstrate the basics of portraiture, blocking in, planar analysis, values, and edges. Once you master these basics, there are many ways to draw a head to convey the subject's soul while establishing your own style. This gallery presents a sampling of my work using different mediums, such as charcoal, graphite, and pastel pencil. You may notice, as well, that while the drawings convey definite similarities in style, they are executed in different ways. Learning is a continuous process that never ends. Encourage you to push yourself to explore new mediums and to gain knowledge from both old masters and contemporary artists. Most of all, be inspired and never give up. Chapter 11. Picture References. About Cuong Nguyen. Cuong Nguyen's ability to highlight the beauty in the world around him is something that informs his art as well as his perspective. One might say that he represents the opposite of the tortured artist Decha, despite the fact that his formative years in Vietnam were characterized by significant hardship. His sometimes romantic and sometimes mysterious portraits reflect his positive outlook and determination to persevere. Growing up in poverty after the fall of Saigon, Cuong's greatest pleasure was finding time to draw. At a young age, he earned extra money for his family by doing street portraits, and he was accepted to Saigon's Academy of Art while in high school. Even as a child, Cuong was fascinated by the human face, and his single-minded practice of drawing eyes and other features rewards us today with portraits that have a spark of life to them. His study at the Academy of Art in Saigon was interrupted when he had the opportunity to immigrate to the U.S. in 1991, and the challenge of establishing himself within a new country and culture temporarily distracted him from his love of fine art. He earned a degree in illustration from San Jose State University and established a successful career as an icon designer with a prominent Silicon Valley web company. Ultimately, though, his passion for fine art resurfaced. It began first as a new hobby, participating as an artist at public street painting festivals, creating ephemeral artworks as large as 16 by 24. Cuong soon established a reputation for painting amazingly lifelike portraits on asphalt, and he was invited to participate in festivals around the world. More importantly, though, this activity brought him back to painting, and he was soon back in his studio endlessly refining his technique with more traditional media. Cuong earned status as a Master Pastelist with Pastel Society of America, Distinguished Pastelist with the Pastel Society of the West Coast, and Master's Circle with IAPS. He has had one-man shows at the Triton Museum and the Los Gatos Museum, both in California, and his work has been featured in both national and international competitions exhibiting worldwide. Cuong shares his techniques through workshops taught at his own studio in California as well as those hosted by art institutes and ateliers throughout the world. For more information on Cuong's teaching schedule, visit his website at icuona.com.